in the lead up to the State of the Union address, the Democrats continue to talk about sexual harassment and sexual abuse and the Me Too moment. Now, the reason they keep doing this is because they figure the longer they keep this alive, let's say that in 2018 Democrats take the House. Good shot that happens, right? Rodney Frelinghuysen, who is a congressman from New Jersey in a real battleground district. He's the head of the House Appropriations Committee. He said that he's not going to run for re-election. The indicators, if you had to make a bet, you'd lay a bet that the Republicans lose the House. It might be closer than you think it'll be, but that's not a terrible bet at this point. So Democrats are hoping that in 2018, they take over the House and then they initiate a series of investigations and hearings about President Trump's proclivity for sexual abuse and harassment, allegedly. And that's what they want. So that's why they're keeping this alive. Well, yesterday, Kirsten Gillibrand, who wants to run for president in 2020, and she's really just a weak, terrible version of Hillary Clinton. She's not as good politically as Hillary Clinton, which is saying a lot. She's a bad liar, which is a much worse liar than Hillary Clinton, which is saying a lot. She goes on The View. Again, we're playing all these clips from The View. Guys, where's my invite? I ask you again. Come on. Okay, so Joy Behar is asking Gillibrand about why she stood against Al Franken. And she says, well, we have to put partisanship aside, and we really have to stand up against sexual abuse in all parties. And that's when Meghan McCain steps in. Now, Meghan McCain, it's really fascinating because Meghan and I used to be politically at odds. I think she used to be a little bit more left-wing, and I probably used to be a little bit more abrasive, believe it or not. And now I will say that Meghan has done a very good job on The View of representing an actual Republican position, which is something The View's been missing for a long time. Watch as Meghan McCain, with two simple questions, dismembers Kirsten Gillibrand on screen. It's amazing. I mean, these are not difficult questions to answer, and they're not difficult questions to ask, but she asks two simple questions, and she turns Kirsten Gillibrand, she reduces Kirsten Gillibrand to a pile of rubble with two simple, straightforward questions.
That is our job. Our job is to speak out, to say no to President Trump, to say it's not okay. We want accountability. We want transparency. We want Congress, specifically Republican leaders, to hold the hearings and have that transparency that we don't have today.
I just want to move on because there's some inconvenient truths on both sides. Reportedly, Hillary Clinton is under fire for covering up for a top advisor who was accused of sexual harassment back in 2007. She docked his pay and made him seek counseling, but allowed him to stay on. And women claim his harassment continued. You are a longtime supporter of the Clintons and consider her a mentor. Do you think her response this weekend was appropriate?
Well, as you know, I think these things have to be dealt with, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican. You need transparency and accountability, and no one is above criticism. But in that case, I don't know all the details.
Suddenly, she just is reduced to a quivering mass of I don't know. And then Meghan McCain follows up, and she asks her, okay, so, you campaigned with the Clintons. Do you regret that? And Kirsten Gillibrand, again, has no answer, because all of this is partisan pandering. It's obvious it's partisan pandering. And how is Hillary Clinton not being raked over the coals today? It's insane. Clinton's campaign manager came out and she said, listen, I wanted to get rid of this guy, right? I wanted to get rid of this guy inside Hillary Clinton's campaign who is her faith advisor, Bern Strider, who is alleged to have sexually harassed the help, right? And Hillary Clinton's campaign manager in 2008, Patty Solis Doyle, she says that she objected to this guy being on staff, Bern Strider, and Hillary personally overruled her.
So, a young woman made a complaint to our head of operations about sexual harassment against Bern Strider, someone who's Jess O'Connell, who's now the CEO of the DNC, against Bern Strider, who she reported to. The incident was brought to my attention, and I did my due diligence. I interviewed all the parties involved. I looked at the evidence. I looked at some emails that he had sent. I had looked at other documents. And came to the conclusion that there was sexual harassment involved, that the young woman was very credible. And my recommendation to the senator was to fire her. And I was overruled.
She was directly overruled by Hillary Clinton. What about the Me Too moment? What about Hillary and the glass ceiling and standing up for women? Where are all the women who are talking about this? I'm glad this is on CNN. Like, I'm not going to pretend that the mainstream media hasn't covered it at all. But can you imagine? Can you imagine the hubbub if somebody inside, for example, the Ted Cruz campaign, one of the people inside the Cruz campaign, had been accused of sexual harassment, and Cruz had just gone, well, no biggie, I'll block the firing. Right? All we'd hear about is men, evil men, scuzzy men, terrible men. But when Hillary Clinton does it, it's totally fine. And meanwhile, the weak-kneedness of the left on these issues is pretty astonishing. So Mark Ruffalo, who is just a political leftist par excellence, And he was speaking out on AM to DM, which is, I guess, BuzzFeed's new show. And he says that, you know, all men have to make a safe space in our privilege. See, that's the thing. When it comes to stopping sexual abuse and sexual harassment, it's really about men making a safe space in our privilege. I don't even know what that means, but apparently you won't like Hulk when he's not angry.
When you're privileged, you have a voice. And right now, men are privileged. They have a privilege over women, you know? It's just the way it is. And so we have to make a space inside of our privilege for a safe space for women to speak up. And I hope, I'm hoping that more and more actors, men, will do it. But they are, and there are ones that do. It's just we need more.
What the hell is he talking about? Anybody know what he's talking about? And the idea that men are privileged over women in American society is absurd, okay? It is not true in the United States right now. There are many, many laws in place to protect women as well. There should be. The idea that this is about men providing a safe space for women. Guess what? This is more about women actually seizing the space for themselves to tell their stories about how they've been sexually abused and harassed. And good for them for doing that. But what's funny is that Ruffalo won't be criticized for being patriarchal, even though what he's actually saying here is kind of patriarchal. He's saying, well, if we just back off, we, the men, we have to allow women to be free. Okay, women are free. It's a free and equal country. And women have the ability to speak out. And when they do, and they do so in productive ways, we should support them. We should also speak out when it turns out that people like Hillary Clinton are stomping on women who are complaining of being harassed. Okay. White privilege is a way to silence anybody who is not of color. That's what white privilege is. It is just a leftist bullshit term that means shut up because you are not a member of a minority group, a privileged minority group in the leftist space. Basically saying to white people who aren't racist, and you can't find any proof of their racism, that they must be racist because they're white. That is called racism. If you are accusing somebody of something simply because of the color of their skin without any evidence, that's called racism, gang. But you don't have to trust me. Let's go through what other people say the definition of white privilege is. You know, folks on the left, what do they say that white privilege is? Well, here's the definition of white privilege from the Southern Poverty Law Center. Quote, white skin privilege is not something that white people necessarily do, create, or enjoy on purpose. Unlike the more overt individual and institutional manifestations of racism, white skin privilege is a transparent preference for whiteness that saturates our society. White skin privilege serves several functions. First, it provides white people with perks that we do not earn and that people of color do not enjoy. Second, it creates real advantages for us. White people are immune to a lot of challenges. And finally, white privilege shapes the world in which we live, the way we navigate and interact with one another and with the world. So let's talk about the perks. Let's talk about the perks that white privilege supposedly confers upon you. So she says, the author here, she says that perks that are conferred upon you by white privilege include things like when you go to the grocery store and you get a Band-Aid, the Band-Aid is your skin tone. Seriously, is what she says. Right? For those who live in the real world, this is also called the free market because most of the people in the country happen to have a lighter shade of skin. And if you want to sell more Band-Aids, then you are going to market to the group of people who buy more Band-Aids. But no, this is white skin privilege. Another example she uses is she says that if you go to a hotel, that the hotel shampoo works better with your hair if you're white than if you're black. And then she talks about the real advantages that are conferred upon you by white skin privileges. So what are those advantages? And this is where we really get to the meat of the matter. She says those advantages include skin color, quote, not working against me in terms of how people perceive my financial responsibility, style of dress, public speaking skills, or job performance, as well as people not assuming I got where I am professionally because of my race. America is a deeply racist country that is imbued with this white skin privilege, and that if you are black, you can never overcome this white skin privilege because you live in a deeply racist system that has been created by Western civilization, a Western civilization founded on racism, sexism, and bigotry. Statistical disparity does not necessarily mean discrimination. This is the first thing you need to know. Okay? Anybody who's ever been in a statistics class knows that this is true. Right? If they still teach statistics and it's not too much of a microaggression. So statistical disparity does not always mean discrimination. Right? The vast majority of people who play in the NBA are black. Very few of them are 5'9" Jews. Right? That is not because there is some sort of anti-Semitic conspiracy to keep 5'9" Jews out of the National Basketball Association. She said that one of the things that works against you if you're black in the United States is how people perceive your financial responsibility. Okay, first thing to say here, capitalism is colorblind. The only color that capitalism cares about is green. Okay, capitalism seriously doesn't care about your color, it doesn't care about your race, it doesn't care about your sexuality. In fact, capitalism is the single best way to overcome racism and sexism and bigotry and homophobia, because if you decide to be any of these things, if you decide to be a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe, the guy next door will not, and he will take all of that money from you. You will be outcompeted. This is the beautiful thing about capitalism. Your advantage in the marketplace is catering to as many clients as possible and to hiring the best people possible. But the usual statistics that are thrown out are statistics about, for example, lenders systematically discriminating against qualified black borrowers. The truth is that if banks routinely did this, they would go bankrupt, of course, because there would be other banks that came in and spend money on black borrowers, and those people would pay back their loans, and these banks would be able to make a mint off of all of this. The widespread perception that black people were not getting loans led the federal government to create a subprime lending program specifically designated to get people of minority ethnic status into homes they could not afford with bad credit. Okay, if it had all been lending discrimination, you would have assumed that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac would have been fine. There would have never been a subprime mortgage crisis. Nothing I'm saying here says discrimination has never existed in America's history. That would be stupid and afactual. But to suggest that it is a continuing factor in American life that is putting people under the boot of the white establishment is just factually nonsense. Job performance, right? They say there's discrimination in job performance, and this is white privilege, right? The fact is that Mizzou has affirmative action in its hiring processes. There are already laws on the books that bar discrimination based on race in hiring. There's already a federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that investigates charges of racism on a routine basis. It has a program. It's called E-Race, the Eradicating Racism and Colorism in Employment. It's designed to fight discrimination against people of color. That is not white privilege. That is the government going out of its way to attempt to fight individual racists and, in some cases, go beyond the evidence in order to demonstrate racism. Talk to the Asian guy who has to score 230 points above the black guy in order to get in the same college before you tell me about white privilege. Okay, poverty. And the idea is that blacks in America are more impoverished than whites because of systemic racism. Okay, according to the Brookings Institute, which is a very left institute, the Brookings Institute has found that if you want to not be permanently poor in the United States, it's actually very easy. This is a wonderful country. If you don't want to be permanently poor in the United States, you need to do 3 things. Finish high school, get a job, don't get pregnant before you get married. That's it. If it's white privilege to sit on the side because you can't go to college because the black guy took your slot because he had a lower SAT score, and it didn't matter that he grew up rich and you grew up poor, right? If that's white privilege, then nobody would want to be a member of the white privileged class. People need to start taking personal responsibility. I know these words are out of style. Personal responsibility for the stuff that you do. It is your life. Make something of it.